Sometimes it feels like we're living in this alternate reality, right? Not like a completely fictional land, but a place where nothing is ever as it seems, where we value status over authenticity and popularity over realness, where we value fiction over fact. A world where we become so afraid of being different, being ostracized, that we contort ourselves to fit in a box that society places us in. And that, my friends, is an alternate reality. But how did we get here? How did we get here? It's a great question. I was really thinking hard last week in my backyard. I don't spend a ton of time in the backyard, but last week I was spending some time in the backyard. Jamila and I had some friends that were going to come over with their kiddos, and they were going to swim in our pool with Gibson and play in the backyard. And I was in a hurry to get the yard cleaned up, get everything mowed, get it nice and tidy. And for the first time in a very long time, I thought maybe I should get a sprinkler. Maybe I should get the sprinkler up and going, get the yard nice and watered. You might be thinking, that's not a weird thought. It's not weird at all, right? But when you really think about it, it is a weird thought. It's hot out. You go to every single yard in the neighborhood, and grass is getting fried by this sun that's just beating on it, right? Grass is dying in one stage or another. And somewhere in that, there's this piece of me that felt this need to somehow fix the problem of my dying grass with a sprinkler. And to be honest with you, it never crossed my mind ever before. But because we had friends coming over and because we were going to be entertaining in our backyard, my heart started to panic a little bit. The truth of the matter is this. I could care less about the grass. It's really not important to me. I don't really care about it at all. Not even in the slightest. But the fear of someone judging me for that grass, of someone somehow thinking less of me, well, it shook me. And that's not authentic. That's certainly not real. So how did we get here? How did we get to this alternate reality? Well, it's fear. Fear that we won't be accepted. Fear that we won't be loved. Fear that someone might not like us because we're different. And that fear has a way of changing our behavior, has a way of changing our faith, and it ultimately has a way of changing our very spirits. It fundamentally changes what we value. Instead of love, we value attention. Instead of sustainability, we value flash. Instead of authenticity, we value popularity. And instead of God, we value things. And in this alternate reality, God falls to the very end of our list. And as a result, we hoard things from God. Our time, our talents, our money, our love, our faith. And in today's scripture, from Genesis, something different happens. Abraham does the exact opposite of all of this. After all this, God tested Abraham. God said, Abraham, yes, answered Abraham, I'm listening. He said, take your dear son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering with one of the mountains that I'll point out to you. And so Abraham got up early in the morning and he saddled his donkey. He took 2 of his young servants and his son Isaac. He had split the wood for the burnt offering. He set out for the place that God had directed him. And on the 3rd day, he looked up and he saw the place in the distance. Abraham had told his 2 young servants, stay here with the donkey. The boy and I are going over there to worship. Then we'll come back to you. And Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and he gave it to his son Isaac to carry. And he carried the flint and the knife. And the 2 of them, they went off together. Isaac said to Abraham, his father, Father, yes, my son, we have flint and wood, but where's the sheep for the burnt offering? Abraham said, Son, God will see to it that there's a sheep for the burnt offering. And they kept on walking together. They arrived at the place which God had directed him. And Abraham built an altar. He laid out the wood, and then he tied up Isaac and laid him on the wood. Abraham reached out and took the knife to kill his son. Just then an angel of God called to him out of heaven. Abraham, Abraham. Yes, I'm listening. Don't lay a hand on that boy. Don't touch him. Now I know how fearlessly you fear God. You didn't hesitate to place your son, your dear son, on the altar for me. And Abraham looked up, and he saw a ram caught by its horns in the thicket. And Abraham took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham named that place, God sees to it. And that's where we get the saying that on the mountain of God, he sees to it. You know, this is a story that we've heard time and time again, but it's painful to read. And as a result of that, most of us, we just stray away from it, right? It's familiar to us, but it doesn't really fit this narrative of God that we have. And it doesn't fit the narrative of what a faithful follower of Jesus looks like and acts like. In the text, God is testing Abraham. And in that testing, he asks that he take his son Isaac up the mountain and sacrifice him, kill him as an offering to God. And for most of us, the story ends here, right? Close the book. We're not going to read any further than that, right? It seems ridiculous. Would anybody out there right now be willing to sacrifice your child to God? Probably not, right? And it seems at first glance like a ridiculous thing to ask, but what we find in the story is a willing Abraham. An Abraham that doesn't immediately question this, that just follows along with what God has asked him to do. He takes Isaac up the mountain. And just at the moment that he has a knife to Isaac's throat, ready to kill him and sacrifice him to God, an angel of the Lord calls out and says, "Don't lay a hand on that boy." And in that moment, we all breathe a sigh of relief, right? And you can almost hear Abraham begin to breathe, for he's been holding his breath this whole moment, waiting for an intervention to happen. And instead of sacrificing Isaac, Abraham's able to use a ram in his place. Now, why do we struggle so much with this story? Why do we struggle to read it, to understand it, to comprehend it? Well, it's easy. It doesn't reconcile with this image of God that we have. And then we think of God as a loving God. So what kind of God would ask a man to sacrifice his child? Doesn't God love us? That doesn't feel like love. And Abraham, following the instructions of God, it doesn't line up with the idea of what a faithful follower of Jesus looks like, of who we strive to be, right? What kind of dad would kill his child? And those are fair thoughts. Those are normal thoughts for you to have when you read this, but they're misguided. Because what we miss in this equation is an understanding of the journey that Abraham has walked with alongside of God. We're so used to seeing things at a surface level that we forget that there's so much that's hiding there beneath the surface. The truth of the matter is, we've all taken a journey with God through our lives. God has been with us through the ups and the downs and the twists and the turns, and every step that we've taken has led us to this very point right here and right now. And no matter how faithful that we've been, God has ushered us through every second along the way. And every time we've trusted God, and even in the moments when we haven't trusted God, God always, without fail, delivered. God always showed up. And maybe not in the way that we planned, and maybe not in the way that we wanted, but God has never, ever, ever failed us. And Abraham had this relationship with God, right? One of faith and of trust, knowing that no matter how tough the road was, no matter how great the obstacle, no matter how impossible the odds seemed, that God always delivered. And so instead of doubting, instead of questioning, Abraham trusted. He just leaned on the trust of God. God tested his faith, and Abraham leaned into faith instead of fear. And my friends, did God deliver? In this story, did God deliver for Abraham? Yes, he did. Every adversity is an opportunity to lean into God. Not to run away, not to cower, to fear, but to stand in faith, to stand in hope. And that faith requires us to be different. It requires us not to fit in. It requires us to walk different, to talk different, to love different, to be willing to sacrifice it all so that we might have it all. So how did we get here? Fear. Fear that we'll be disappointed. Fear that we'll be hurt. Fear that we won't be enough. Fear that God won't show up when we need God. But faith is stronger than fear. Faith is braver than fear. Faith is better than fear. Faith that God can do the improbable and the impossible. That faith truly changes things. So the question lies before you, my friends. Are you brave enough to choose faith over fear? I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Thanks be to God.